Estamos, voy a tratar de decir la palabra más precisa, chochos. Chochos, porque después de mucho tiempo queriendo tener una conversación profunda con una persona muy importante para el cuidado de la naturaleza en Chile, finalmente como que nos cayó un rayo de las bendiciones y estamos aquí con Kristine Tompkins, una persona que ha sido central en la conservación de nuestra naturaleza, de nuestra riqueza, que ha empujado para que así sea, para reconstruir los ecosistemas, no solo para cuidar lo que había. So, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for those kind words.
I don't know, what's the word you like to be defined by? Like, I'm Kristine Tompkins, who are you?
I am a family member, a devoted friend, a protector of all things wild, and try to live with no fear.
Oh, that's beautiful. And do you have a wild part that you are trying to protect of yourself?
No, I don't protect it. I try to spend it.
That's great. We're going to come back to the wild side, okay?
Okay.
Well, really, we feel very honored to have you here in Futuro 360 because it's our love and obsession try to talk about nature and the real possibilities to take care of it. So your history, your work, it's been so important for Chile. And I would like to start trying to understand what's the place that Chile has in your heart, in your nature heart.
Oh, I think it's very hard to separate my internal almost chest from Chile as a country. I didn't arrive here when I was young. I was 43 years old with my husband, Douglas Tompkins, and we lived a very extreme life in the extreme south of Chile. And I think that it's almost like putting your hand on fire. You know, you live in these extreme circumstances, and at first you're scared by them, you're shocked by them, and pretty soon you just mold yourself into that level of intensity.
Could you explain us why was it so intense and so extreme? Because maybe somebody doesn't know this story, you know?
Well, I think whether you arrived from Santiago or San Francisco or New York, when we arrived, Doug had bought a small farm, which is now part of just outside of Pumaling Douglas Tompkins National Park. There is no road, no internet, no phones, no electricity, very intense weather, and we could leave. Doug was a bush pilot, so if the weather was good enough, we could go to Portamont for groceries, but if it wasn't good enough, you stay put. And the team members that were forming in the 1990s, the early 90s, everybody was moving around in the Fiordo Renue, Fiordo Comau, very intense water, everything was dramatic.
So, but this is the...
Hard to describe.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it. And obviously, if we try to think on nature, intensity, it has different shapes or ideas. It was the intensity of wildness and to be in that extreme place. But I know that you also have a very extreme experience with the people, because you weren't welcome in a very Chilean nice way, you know, because we say we are very good with foreign people, and finally you didn't have that experience. So how was it?
Well, I'm looking at that time in our lives 30 years later, so I look back on it in a very different way that I was experiencing it at the moment.
I know.
So it was complicated because we were naive, I think, and we didn't really understand the impact, not just buying land and holding it as private owners, because that's, of course, in every country that happens, but the biggest issue was buying large tracts of land and not producing something from it. And the way we looked at it is we were continuing to produce something in these forests, in the grasslands, but we were changing what it produces. So we were, I think, naive to understand that somehow if we explained this to somebody, they would really see it in our full measure. But it was very clear that it was very suspicious, distrustful, that, and I'm sure you've heard these things, we were going to start a new Jewish state, even though we weren't Jews, an Air Force base for the Argentines, and all of these things that seemed outrageous. But now I look at it, what we were doing for that time in that place was outrageous. It was unusual. And in the absence of understanding something, I think we all...
Yeah, you were aliens.
We all...
You arrived with an idea that was so out of the box in that moment, no?
And we're from the United States. And the United States wasn't in those days winning a popularity contest in Chile. There was a lot of suspicion about that. And then once we bought enough land that actually, in parentheses, cut Chile in half, I think it was an easy way to build context around Doug and Kristine Tompkins, the couple who cut Chile in half. But honestly, I completely understand why it happened. Actually, I was having breakfast with someone this morning, and they formally apologized to me about the way that the early years were seen in Chile, and I truly, I appreciate that, but I don't even think it's the right way to look back on history. I think it was a combination of factors, and no matter where you're working in conservation around the world, there is this natural pressure, tension between production, extraction, and the conserving of natural resources. So we learned a lot, and I think everyone learned a lot.
No, I think that it's very elocuente. I would do this Spanish-English thing. It's very elocuente from the past and from our common history that we think that is suspicious not to produce something. Because we are living in this world, this very materialistic world. Mm-hmm. We are trying to win, I don't know what race. And that mindset has bring us out to this point in terms of global warming and etc. So for that moment you were aliens and you were talking about why are you not producing? Why are not don't you put a lot of ships there? I don't know. So that's interesting because that was a revolution in that moment, and it's still a revolution. It's still something difficult to explain.
I'm not so sure about that.
Really?
I'm not so sure. If you look at, and I speak of the United States or really almost any country, when you look back 35 years, which is longer than a human generation, it's a long time. And you look at the evolution of how many families or people are taking their private properties and deciding to protect it.
That's true.
And deciding, they may not do what we had decided to do so many years ago, but that there have been huge changes, I think, in Chile. And
that's true.
The same thing happened in the United States. There are a lot of very big landowners who don't choose necessarily to give it all away to the citizens of the country, but they are very clear and very determined to make those lands forever protected. And that in itself is a sea change that is remarkable, really.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking on, in Chile, here in this little spot of the world, we are having hard times to make the nature conversation to be in the mainstream. I think that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, or when the COP
Sí.
25 iba a ocurrir en Chile, but didn't happen. That was easier. But right now we are talking about a lot about growing and what are we going to do to change Chilean face for the future, if we are going to be good enough. So nature is starting to be outside of the conversation. But we are living more than in any time before all the effects of not doing enough. So I would like to, I watch a lot of videos of you, and I saw one of those where you said, if the question is survival and not just survival of nature, but also for human dignity, we all have to work together to take care of the world. And do you think that human dignity and human development is possible at the same time of taking care of nature? Do you think that that is possible in this world, limited world, a lot of people, a lot of needs?
Well, first of all, I think there's no choice. Whether we like it, we don't like it, is it easy or it's difficult, that is every decade becoming less important, because if someone asks me, do you think climate change is real? Of course it's real. It's taking place around the world. There are hundreds of millions of people, not necessarily all having to move yet, but if you live in the South Sudan or the Southern Pacific Islands or so many places on Earth, this story is playing out. The game is on. So in a lot of industrial countries, we can kind of push that inevitability out, but it is inevitable. And this is why the question of immigration is so heated now, because the United States, of course, there was a general election recently in the United States, and this is going to have a shock, well, it already is having a shockwave through the world, because in the United States, we look at these people who have no choice but to move somewhere, whether they're from Mexico or Venezuela or Ethiopia. We call it immigration, but in fact, what's happening around the world is migration. And I've thought about this a lot lately, that we don't call it migration because we don't really want to worry why tens of millions of people have to be on the move. And they're the very people, as David Attenborough says, who have no say in the matter, and they're the very people who can't afford to actually get out of the way of all of this. So countries like Chile, the United States, we will feel the direct effects of that later than most countries will. But is it taking place? Of course. Can any country hide from the effects of the chaos of climate and the disruption of social fabrics and so on? No, no one is going to avoid this. And I want to say one more thing. I study the collapse of civilizations quite a bit over time. And one of the absolute constant circumstances that is woven through the ones at least that we know about is that common sense is always trumped by culture. So what we're trying to change everywhere is our culture, and that's the most difficult thing to change of all. So if we have common sense today, we would all be doing things differently. You and I would be, our families would be, but our culture is so fixed that the choice to let everything collapse is more palpable than actually forcing ourselves to change the way we live.
Yeah, it's very difficult to change, and it's very difficult to stop doing the things as we did in the past.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to say something about things that maybe we shouldn't do again. I mean, like, I don't know, should we be having salmon farms in our protected areas? I mean, maybe not. It's difficult, but that's difficult because it's also a question of human dignity, human development, and nature survival. So we are in this triangle, and I am surprised by your animo. You look happy and quiet and calm. And I would like to know, how do you live in this world with this news, with this climate change happening, and with this work that we are not doing still?
Well, I get asked a lot if I'm optimistic.
Are you?
No. No, I'm a pessimist.
Everybody answer me that, you know.
I'm a pessimist for this century. But I feel strongly, which at 74 is just a hunch in my case, I won't see it, that some very profound tectonic things will have to change between the human and non-human relationship. That's for sure. We can do it voluntarily, or it will take place involuntarily, but it will happen. So I'm not motivated by optimism. I'm motivated by my personal pessimism that even if you think your ship is sinking for a moment, you want to try to preserve what you can, in our case, and keep reaching for more dignified human communities and whole, whether it's in the sea or on the land. So I'm really driven by how I see this century, and not by my optimism.
No, I love that your pessimism is something. It's very original answer. And how do you see humans? Because when you start protecting nature, maybe we had a model of non-human contact with this perfect space that nature has created. I mean, in the past, we used to have a lot of that kind of protected areas.
Yeah.
But right now, we know, well, we are much more people, and we know that we need to integrate people on the model. Have you lived that in your own mindset? How do you live now with that community? I mean, in an internal way, from your heart. How do you live with that community? How do you think that humans can work? Are they a good part of ecosystems or not? They're very, it's just you and me in this interview. Don't worry about what you say.
Just the two of us, okay. That's such a good question, and I think it's the question that is probably the most profound. I see things in a very evolutionary way. And the evolutionary Autobahn moves much faster than we think it does. We see ourselves in 2024, and we're living these lives, and we're working hard, and these are just tiny flips of the switch. And the rise and fall of different species will happen, in my opinion, forevermore. I have no idea if the human species as we know it today will survive, not survive, but I do know that we have an opportunity as a species to live much closer to the ground, much more in kinship with the non-human world, whether it's pumas or the Darwin frog or whatever it is. We have the capacity to do that, and it is not an either or. It is not we live in concert with the non-human world, including very much obviously the sea, and or not. You can have a dignified, very high quality life, caring about all life, that all life has intrinsic value. And that if you really believe that, then every decision you make with your children, with, with everything, every breath you take becomes much more interesting, because so much more is asked of us. Right now, all that is asked for us is we take care of our family, a few friends, we become as wealthy as possible, and that we stay healthy, we live longer, and whatever it is, what is really asked of us is very superficial today, we as moderns. And it's such a short time ago when, if you look at indigenous cultures, and let's take the Native Americans of North America, just 150 years ago, 100 years ago, they were asked as a community and as a larger community to live within certain boundaries that they thrived on. We as moderns keep chopping off the things that we feel we should be responsible for. We lose the context in which we depend on things. The sea, if people just talk about the oceans, life came from the oceans, and it's probably going to go back there at the rate we're going. So we have changed so much. We're a technological mind today. We moderns are so less skilled than even our great-grandparents. And the more shallow we imagine we can live, the greater our peril. That's how I see it.
Okay. No, I love it. I share your point of view in so many sense. In fact, I was thinking, what is your non-human favorite being? Maybe not one, but two or three. I don't know. What is amazing you now? Because I think I feel something similar with and in nature and for nature. And every time I find something new and amazing and surprising, and it moves me and changes me. So what is your not human being? No.
Well, I tell you something, it's not a being, but it's an experience.
Okay.
And I think for me, it comes through an experience. And last week, Carolina Morgado, who's the executive director of Rewilding Chile, and I and a few other people decided to walk from the Cruz del Mar, which is at the southernmost tip of the South American continent, all the way to the historic Faro. It's a 4-day walk, and one of the wildest times of my life. And here's what the gift is. Besides getting beaten up and you're near tears because you're exhausted and so on, your opportunity to be so small. And it doesn't take me very long to get someplace and begin to shrink. And this is where we are reminded so powerfully, sometimes really harshly, how tiny we are in the scheme of things, and that you can be famous, you can be rich, you can be all sorts of dramatic contemporary humans, and finally we are incredibly small. And that's where it gets really interesting, because in parts of that walk, it's not that any of us were going to drop dead. We may have felt like that from time to time, but that was never true. But it's one of those experiences where you have to watch your feet every step, because out there, if something happens to you, there's nobody coming for you necessarily. It would take quite a while. And this is when you realize how tough you are, how physically, but also mentally tough we can be, pushing ourselves in extreme circumstances way past what we remember ourselves being capable of. And somehow, this is a long-winded answer to your question. I think I don't have favorite species. I have the deep understanding of my place on this planet. And if everybody had those kinds of experiences, they don't have to be as extreme as we tend to go, then you begin to realize we have lived in such a sheltered way and lost our way back. No, we have lost our way forward to defending not only ourselves and families and friends, but this sense of all life.
What's your, in which part of your work nowadays you are trying to be tough to remember that you have to defend that life on Earth?
You know, somebody asked Carolina one day if she had one word to describe me, and she said without hesitation, relentless, which a lot of people have called me that. And it was always in a pejorative way, in sort of a sweet negative way, basically. And now I'm so proud of being relentless. I really am, because I want to do this till I drop dead. And I have no interest in slowing down and trying to understand that there's this equanimity in my life that I should take advantage of. And no, and especially since Doug died.
Especially,
I have
of
no
course.
fear.
Of course.
And we have nothing to lose. And it's a miracle when you decide to live your life as if you have nothing to lose. That is true freedom. And sometimes you make good decisions, sometimes you make lousy decisions. But fear of really anything is not a
terrible
hindrance.
advisor. Is a terrible
Yeah.
advisor. Well, I have to end because everybody's telling me too many minutes.
No, I know.
No, but I'm super happy for this. So really, thank you for your time.
No, thank you,
but
guys.
I really want to know one more thing, and is what's your wildest spot, and how do you honor it?
Oof.
A little question.
Maybe a
to
lot
end.
of wild parts. I honor love. I'm big on love.
With all human and non-human.
Yes.